Amira Brooks sat near the back of the gleaming auditorium, pen tapping idly against her notebook. Sentinel Dynamics' new headquarters smelled of polished chrome and expensive coffee, a sterile kind of opulence that set her teeth on edge. On stage, a towering screen flashed words in sleek, futuristic fonts: Vanguard, the future of urban safety. The crowd, an ocean of dark suits and pastel dresses, leaned forward as Elon Musk himself took the stage, casual in a black t-shirt and jeans. He smiled that offhand, boy genius smile the media loved so much. Cameras flashed. Applause swelled. Amira barely blinked. This, Musk said, gesturing broadly, is not just a tool. It's a new nervous system for our cities. Safer streets, faster responses, smarter policing. His voice was pure performance, a comfortable hum of inevitability. Behind him, a promotional video rolled, smiling families strolling down clean, well-lit sidewalks, a diverse montage of citizens waving cheerfully at gleaming drone towers. A single phrase pulsed across the screen: "Safety has no bias." Amira's mouth tightened. She jotted a note. Safety slogans are easy. Code is harder. The press conference blurred into self-congratulation, executives trading jargon like currency, each one selling the same sanitized dream. When questions opened to the floor, Amira stood, smoothing the front of her simple gray blazer. "Elon," she began, her voice steady but carrying, "given the long-standing issues with racial bias and predictive policing algorithms, what safeguards have you implemented to ensure Vanguard doesn't replicate or exacerbate those patterns?" A beat of silence. Musk tilted his head, flashing a practiced grin. "That's the beauty of machine learning," he said. "It's data-driven, not emotion-driven. Machines don't care about race." Polite chuckles rippled through the room. Amira didn't laugh. She kept her gaze steady, feeling, not for the first time, how deeply the question had been deflected without being answered. When the conference ended, reporters flocked to get their sound bites. Amira moved quietly to the edges, observing, listening. She caught snatches of conversation. "Can you believe how fast they're scaling this? Contracts already lined up with 6 cities. Finally, tech that gets rid of human error." She wrote another note in the margin of her notebook. Machines learn from humans. Garbage in, garbage out. Outside, the California sun burned sharp against the glass facade. Amira pulled her phone from her bag, checked her messages. One stood out, a tip from a source she hadn't heard from in months. No subject line, just a short, chilling line. "Watch who it flags first." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, heart ticking faster. No alarms, no panic. Just a familiar shift, like the first cold edge of a gathering storm. Across the street, a Vanguard surveillance drone hovered in idle circles, its sleek black eye scanning the crowds with mechanical indifference. Amira lifted her chin against the light, watching the machine watch her. 2 weeks later, Amira sat at her small kitchen table, the city buzzing faintly through the cracked window. Her laptop screen was a battlefield of tabs, news articles, community forum posts, half-written drafts. In the corner, a notification blinked, new message, Bay Justice Collective. She clicked. The video was grainy, clearly shot from a phone. A boy 16, maybe, stood against a brick wall, hands raised, 3 police officers surrounding him. One barked orders while another checked a tablet, the Vanguard interface unmistakable. The caption below read, "Facial match. Threat level, elevated." Amira pressed play again, slower this time. The boy's expression, part fear, part disbelief, lodged under her ribs. According to the report, he had been on his way home from school. No warrants. No priors. The only evidence against him was an algorithm's cold misfire. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could already hear the responses if she wrote about it. Isolated incident. Glitch. Statistical noise. She pulled up city data on recent Vanguard flagged detainments. It took hours, digging through municipal transparency portals and local arrest logs. But when she filtered by zip code, one pattern became grotesquely clear. Neighborhoods with the highest rates of false positives weren't the ones with the highest crime rates. They were the blackest. Amira sat back, heart drumming against her ribs. The numbers weren't subtle. They weren't deniable. And yet, no one seemed to be looking. A text buzzed against the table. "Mom. Checking in. You working too hard again?" Amira smiled faintly and texted back. "Always. Love you." The small warmth steadied her. When she turned back to the laptop, she wasn't just seeing data anymore. She was seeing faces, the boy in the video, the grandmother stopped outside a grocery store because her face partially matched a flagged image, the countless others whose dignity was being quietly eroded in the name of efficiency. She crafted a short piece for her independent column, carefully worded. No accusations. Just questions. Who audits the auditors? What happens when an error has a badge and a gun? The article went live at midnight. By morning, it had been shared modestly among activist circles and thoroughly ignored by mainstream media. In her inbox, the backlash was already gathering. "You're making this about race when it's about safety." Another angry black woman crying wolf. "If you don't like it, maybe move to a different country." Amira closed her eyes for a moment, letting the bitterness pass through her like smoke. This was not new. This was not unexpected. But it didn't make it hurt less. Later that afternoon, she met with Marcus Reed, a civil rights attorney and one of the few allies who still picked up her calls. "They're running the oldest playbook in the world," Marcus said over coffee, pushing a manila envelope toward her. "Discredit the messenger. Smother the message." Amira opened the folder. Inside were documents, arrest records, internal memos, a preliminary study from a university professor warning of Vanguard's biases. None of it had seen daylight. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You're poking at something real, Amira. They know it. That's why they're trying to kill it early." Amira thumbed through the papers, feeling the weight of them. "You think it'll matter?" she asked quietly. Marcus's gaze sharpened. "It always matters, even when it feels like it doesn't." That night, as she walked home alone, the streetlights flickered against the fog rolling in from the bay. Somewhere overhead, she could hear the soft mechanical whir of a drone. Amira kept walking, head high, the machine's gaze pricking at the back of her neck. The first thing Amira learned was that Vanguard's code was locked tighter than a vault. The second thing she learned was that wasn't an accident. At her desk, she pored over Sentinel Dynamics public filings, promotional materials, patent registrations, anything she could scrape together. The company spoke endlessly about revolutionary pattern recognition and AI-enabled threat detection, but said almost nothing about the datasets used to train the system. Opaque by design. The deeper she dug, the colder the trail grew. Her editor at the Bay Post called her in for a meeting. "You're drifting off assignment," he said, voice soft, hands folded neatly on the polished desk. Amira leaned back in her chair. "I'm following a story." "A story," he repeated carefully, "that accuses one of the most powerful companies in the country of systemic racial bias." "I'm not accusing anyone yet," she said, her voice steady. "I'm investigating." The editor sighed. "Just be smart about how far you push this." In the newsroom elevator, Amira stared at her reflection, the tight set of her mouth, the stubborn line of her jaw. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what kind of smart he meant. Don't make trouble. Don't bite the hand that feeds us. Don't make it about race. In the evenings, after the city settled into its uneasy sleep, Amira worked alone. Long hours. Dark coffee. Quiet rage. She mapped out arrest locations flagged by Vanguard. Overlaid them with census data. Highlighted them against old redlining maps. The result was brutal in its precision. Vanguard wasn't blind. It saw exactly what it had been taught to see. Bias baked into ones and zeros, hidden behind the sheen of objectivity. The first real break came through a burner email account. Subject: internal only. Please be careful. Attached was a single PDF. Pre-deployment bias audit, confidential. Her heart pounding, Amira opened the file. The audit report was blunt. Significant racial skew identified in threat designation. Mitigation required before public deployment. Below that, handwritten comments. Low priority. Push ahead. No visible PR risk. A final line, typed and initialed. Full green light from EM. Elon Musk. Amira sat back, the air around her thick and electric. Proof, not just of bias, but of willful disregard. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Amira Brooks? A man's voice. Smooth, casual. Who's asking? Just a concerned citizen, he said lightly. Maybe someone who thinks you're poking your nose where it doesn't belong. The call ended before she could respond. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, the receiver crackling faintly in her ear. It wasn't the first threat she'd ever received, but it was the first that carried the oily calm of certainty, the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. Amira stared at the city lights blinking in the distance. This wasn't just about data anymore. It was about power, about who got to define threat and who got to be invisible. She opened a fresh document on her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. No dramatics, no speeches, just the steady, relentless truth. The kind that couldn't be unseen once it was shown. Amira spent the next 72 hours chasing ghosts. The audit report was real. She'd verified the document's metadata, traced its origins. But in the court of public opinion, that wouldn't be enough. Not against a company like Sentinel Dynamics. Not against a man like Musk. She needed corroboration. Names. Voices. Flesh and blood to go with the data. The problem was, inside Sentinel, fear was the currency. Engineers who once retweeted progressive slogans now ghosted her DMs. Mid-level managers who liked her articles last year suddenly changed their profiles to private. At 2 a.m. on the third night, her phone buzzed again. Blocked number. Amira let it ring out. 30 seconds later, a text arrived. If you want the real files, come alone. Embarcadero Station. South entrance. 30 minutes. No name. No sender. She sat still for a moment, considering. Every instinct screamed caution. But every instinct also whispered, this is what the job looks like. 30 minutes later, she stood beneath the sodium orange lights of the Embarcadero Station, the air thick with mist and the stale smell of damp concrete. Footsteps approached. A woman in a Sentinel Dynamics hoodie, early 30s, tired eyes. She glanced around quickly, then pressed a USB drive into Amira's hand. I can't stay, she muttered. They're watching. They watch everyone now. Why help me? Amira asked. The woman hesitated, fear flickering across her face. Then, almost too quietly to hear, because when they told us about the errors, they said it didn't matter. They said no one would notice. And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the station. Amira stood frozen for a beat, the drive burning cold in her hand. She took it home, ran it through 3 layers of encryption, and opened it on a machine she never connected to the internet. Inside were hundreds of files. Emails, training data breakdowns, internal Slack chats, and among them, the real smoking gun. A series of meeting notes from 6 months ago. Project lead. 95% false positive rate for black males under 30 flagged as elevated threat. Executive response. Statistical noise. Public won't see back end. Move forward. Elon Musk, final sign-off. Can't afford to wait for perfection. Deploy now. Apologize later if needed. Amira sat back in her chair, the glow of the screen painting sharp lines across her face. It was all there. Not just the bias, but the conscious choice to ignore it. She knew what publishing this meant. They would smear her, call her bitter, call her political, call her emotional. There would be lawsuits, death threats, and worse, friends who quietly disappeared, contacts who stopped returning calls. She closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight settle in. Then she pulled her chair closer, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to write. Not for fame, not for clicks. For the boy against the brick wall. For every mother walking under the cold gaze of a drone. For every quiet injustice the machine pretended not to see. When the article went live, she didn't announce it with a tweet or a post. She just pressed publish and let the truth move on its own. It didn't take long. Within an hour, #Vanguard Gate was trending. By morning, her inbox was a battlefield of praise, fury, disbelief. Cable news anchors argued. Editorials clutched at false equivalencies. Sentinel Dynamics issued a terse statement, deeply committed to diversity and inclusion. And then came the real blowback. Anonymous threats escalated. Her apartment door was defaced with a crude message, "Liar." Still, she stayed. Still, she wrote. Still, she refused to disappear. Because she understood something the machine builders didn't. You can program a machine to forget, but you can't program a mind that remembers. Amira watched the storm from the sidelines. She refused every interview request. She declined every podcast, every offer to appear on TV panels where talking heads would reduce her work to a 10-second soundbite. Let the documents speak. Let the truth breathe without her voice getting packaged and sold. It was both strategic and survival. The public reaction fractured almost instantly. Activists flooded social media with outrage. How many more broken lives are acceptable for profit? Technological racism is still racism. If a machine sees me as a threat, it's because a human told it to. But the backlash was just as fierce. Corporate pundits dismissed her as an angry activist trying to derail progress. Anonymous accounts flooded her inbox with messages calling her a liar, a race baiter, a traitor. The official Sentinel Dynamics response came 3 days later. A slickly produced video featuring a multiracial panel of employees beaming about algorithmic fairness and our commitment to equality. Amira recognized the tactic instantly. Flood the zone. Confuse the public. Make it seem like two sides of a reasonable debate. They weren't debating facts anymore. They were debating whether facts even mattered. Meanwhile, cities that had signed early contracts with Vanguard scrambled to distance themselves. Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia. One by one, they announced pauses or internal reviews. Protesters marched outside Sentinel's headquarters carrying signs. Bias in, bias out. Black Lives algorithm profits. Musk, for his part, stayed mostly silent, save for a single, flippant tweet. Machines aren't racist. People are. Grow up. The tweet went viral. Screenshotted. Debated. Torn apart. Defended. Amira read it once, closed the app, and didn't look again. Late at night, she sat alone in her apartment, the buzz of her refrigerator the only sound. She read the anonymous death threats carefully, cataloging each one like a curator of malice. She wasn't afraid in the way they wanted her to be. She was exhausted, worn thin by the endless calculus of whether truth was enough against power. Marcus called her one evening, voice low and steady. "You knew they'd come for you," he said. "I knew," she replied. "You're not alone." She almost believed him. Almost. The following week, a group of Sentinel engineers staged a walkout. Small at first, a handful of employees refusing to work, demanding a full public audit. Then larger. Whistleblowers came forward, confirming her findings. Internal memos leaked. Private chats. Staff resignations. The dam cracked, and then it broke. Amira stayed quiet through it all. No victory laps. No self-congratulation. She knew better than to mistake noise for change. It wasn't until Sentinel's stock plummeted by 15% in a single day that Musk reappeared, staging a hastily organized press conference. Standing before the press, he looked less like the untouchable titan and more like a man grappling with consequences he thought he'd never face. "We recognize," he said, face carefully composed, "that Vanguard's deployment raised important concerns. We are deeply sorry for any harm caused." The words were clean, practiced. Amira watched the clip from her couch, expression unreadable. Musk continued. "We will be relaunching Vanguard under strict new ethical oversight. Independent audits. Transparency standards. Public input. This is a new beginning." Cameras flashed. Reporters nodded. Some clapped. Amira closed her laptop. She didn't need to hear more. She already knew. They would patch the system. They would issue apologies. But the real work, the harder, slower, invisible work, wouldn't come from the people who had built the machine wrong in the first place. It would come from the ones who had seen the ghost inside it and refused to look away. From people like her. From people who understood that the machine hadn't failed. It had functioned exactly as designed. The news cycle moved faster than grief. By the end of the week, Vanguard was off the streets. Contract cancellations were tallied like sports scores. Corporate apologies filled the airwaves like confetti after a hollow parade. Amira sat alone in a neighborhood cafe, the steam from her untouched tea curling in lazy spirals. No one recognized her here. Or if they did, they were kind enough to pretend they didn't. Across the street, a Vanguard drone still hovered in place, decommissioned, but not yet dismantled. A ghost still lingering over the city. She watched it sway slightly in the breeze, tethered by invisible currents it no longer understood. In her inbox, congratulations mixed with cautions. You're a hero. Stay safe. Don't let them bury you next. An old friend from journalism school sent a single line. You won the battle, but be careful, the war shifts. She knew what he meant. Already the narrative was changing. Already there were op-eds talking about lessons learned and moving forward as if history was a wheel that turned without blood. Already there were people forgetting. Amira closed her laptop, pushing the noise away. The waitress refilled her tea without asking. A small kindness. A reminder that life, in its quiet ways, resisted forgetting too. Amira wrapped her hands around the warm mug and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just breath. In, out. She thought about the boy from the video, how small he had looked against that brick wall, how big the accusation had loomed over him. She thought about her mother's voice from long ago, sitting at the kitchen table, helping her with homework. Being right doesn't always protect you, but it's still worth being. Outside, a group of kids chased a soccer ball across the sidewalk, their laughter splitting the heavy air. Life insisted on going on. Amira sipped her tea, tasting the bittersweetness of it. Across town, Sentinel Dynamics held another press conference. They spoke of reforms, of community partnerships, of a brighter, more equitable future. The media broadcast it dutifully. The stock market rallied. The world, for the most part, turned the page. But Amira remembered. She remembered every quiet denial, every polite dismissal, every moment where someone in power had looked at injustice and decided it was tolerable because it was invisible. She carried those memories not like weights, but like stones in a riverbed, shaping the current of her life, steady and relentless. When she finally stood to leave, she left a tip that covered more than the tea. Small kindnesses, quiet resistance. Outside, the drone's shadow crossed her path one last time. She looked up at it, not with fear, not with hatred, but with the steady gaze of someone who had learned to see what others tried to forget. Then she walked on, letting the ghost fade behind her. The invitations started coming quietly. Panels, lectures, advisory boards. Everyone, it seemed, wanted Amira's name attached to something now. A shining example of moral clarity in a story that many wished to package, soften, and sell. She declined most offers, not out of pride, but because she knew how easily stories could be turned into slogans, and slogans into silence. Still, some requests were different. The University of California invited her to speak at a seminar on ethics in AI development. Not a keynote. No cameras. Just a classroom of students who would someday build the future. Amira accepted. The lecture hall was small, the walls lined with mismatched chairs and scuffed whiteboards. No grandeur. No spectacle. She liked it immediately. The students listened closely as she spoke, not about the scandal, not about herself, but about the slow, patient work of looking closely at systems everyone else accepts as neutral. She talked about the hidden choices in data curation, about how bias wasn't a glitch, it was a design, inherited from the world that built it. Technology is not neutral, she said, her voice even. It inherits the hopes and the fears of the people who create it. It remembers our mistakes unless we teach it something better. Afterward, a young woman with dark, impatient eyes approached her. I'm studying machine learning, the girl said, almost defiantly. I used to think bias was just an accident. Now I'm not so sure. Amira smiled faintly. Doubt is a good place to start. The girl hesitated, then added, I'm building a project for my senior thesis. Facial recognition, but with transparency at every step. Like, A way to audit the system itself. Would you? Would you look at it? Amira's throat tightened. Small shifts. Quiet revolutions. Send it to me, she said. When she left the campus, the late afternoon sun threw long shadows across the courtyard. Students sprawled on the grass, arguing, laughing, dreaming. She stood for a moment, letting the sound of it settle around her. This was the part no headline would capture. Not the scandal. Not the apology. Not the fall and rise of Sentinel Dynamics. But this. A handful of students learning to question what they built. A new generation realizing that the ghost inside the machine was not destiny, but a choice. Amira adjusted her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the street. The future wasn't a sudden victory. It was this, slow, stubborn seeds planted in worn soil. She wasn't naive. She knew the machine would shape-shift. New faces, new slogans, same old hunger. But she also knew that memory was a force, and she would not forget. Neither, she hoped, would they. Months passed. The world moved on the way it always did, relentlessly, indifferently. Sentinel Dynamics rebranded Vanguard under a new name, Aegis. New marketing campaigns rolled out, full of carefully curated diversity. New slogans promised fairness, transparency, trust. Most people forgot. Most people wanted to. Amira watched it happen without surprise, but without despair either. Because not everyone forgot. Small cities canceled their smart policing programs altogether. Several universities added mandatory ethics reviews to their computer science curricula. Journalists, younger and hungrier, cited her story as the beginning of their own investigations. The machine hadn't been dismantled, but it had been made visible. And that was something. One morning, Amira walked through East Oakland, where murals bloomed over cracked walls and community gardens clawed life from neglected lots. The city was still wounded, still scarred, but alive. A small corner library had repainted its facade. Bright blues and yellows, children's handprints trailing up the walls. Outside, a bulletin board was crowded with flyers, free tutoring, food drives, Know Your Rights workshops. One flyer caught her eye. Tech for Justice Workshop, building tools, not weapons. She smiled, a real smile this time, small but certain. Inside the library, she found a corner table, tucked between two overstuffed shelves. She pulled out her notebook, not her laptop, and began to write. Not an article, not a takedown, just thoughts, fragments, reminders. What is built can be rebuilt. What is coded can be recoded. The system is not inevitable. The system is a decision. Children's laughter drifted from the other side of the shelves. Sunlight pooled across the carpet in wide, lazy patches. Amira wrote until her hand cramped, until the words slowed and finally settled into silence. When she stood to leave, she tucked the notebook into her bag, not for publication, not for anyone else. Just to remember. Outside, she paused on the steps, feeling the weight of the morning sun on her skin. The world was still broken, still messy, still unfinished. But somewhere beneath the noise and forgetting, small shifts were happening. And that, the stubborn refusal to look away, the insistence on remembering, the planting of seeds in hard soil, that was victory. Not the kind with parades or medals. Not the kind that made headlines. But the kind that lasted. Amira adjusted her bag and stepped into the street, the city humming around her, alive with all its imperfect, unfinished hopes. The ghost in the machine was still there, lingering. But so was she.